Bertemu kembali, kepimpinan dan pengurusan korporat adalah antara isu yang hangat dibincangkan apabila sesebuah syarikat berdepan masalah besar. Daripada Lloyd Blankfein di Goldman Sachs pada Datuk Ahmad Zubir Mursyid di Sime Darby, isu yang tidak asing dibincangkan adalah pengurusan korporat. iCliff hari ini melancarkan sesi pertama persidangan Leading Voices yang turut membincangkan isu kepimpinan dan pengurusan. Antara yang menarik dalam sesi berkenaan termasuk pelancaran buku Too Many Bosses, Too Few Leaders, karya pengarah eksekutif dan ketua pegawai eksekutif iCliff, Rajiv Peshavria. Dan bersama kita di studio untuk membincangkan sesi berkenaan isu kepimpinan dan pengurusan korporat adalah Rajiv Peshavria. Thank you for joining us, Rajiv.
Thank you.
First of all, let's talk about leadership. I think I've mentioned two names in the introduction to this discussion, which is the CEO of Goldman Sachs and also Sime Darby. They are great leaders, no doubt about it. But there's this issue about corporate governance when it comes to where they are previously or where they are currently. How do we bridge leadership and corporate governance so that there's not a vacuum in between, so one can be a good leader and also have good corporate governance?
I think that's a great question. You know, in my way of thinking, when you think about leadership, it needs to have two things, not just a purpose, but also a set of values. So it's not just the results that you want to create, but also how are you going to create them? How will you behave when tested? And I think it's the failure of values which gets leaders into trouble, which gets bosses into trouble. So if the sole purpose is just to make money and be more and more profitable, and there are no underlying values to go with it, that's when a leader gets into trouble. And that's where the role of corporate governance has to come in, to make sure that that the management is not doing something that they should not be doing. They're not taking too much risk. They're not letting their greed get over them, ahead of them. But if a leader leads not just with a purpose but also with values, I think governance takes care of itself.
So in that case, leadership must also be must also come with check and balance system. Existing within the environment.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, the value system of the organization should itself be a check and balance. Secondly, internal control systems, which are totally up to the management to frame, should be the check and balance. And then there should be a smart way for the board to actually stay on top of the situation as to whether the checks and balances are working. For example, I mean, how many times do boards actually do an audit on whether the company and management is living its values? Every company has a stated set of corporate values of integrity, honesty, excellence, and all that. You have boards doing audits on a whole lot of things, but does a board usually do a values-based audit? Those are the kind of things that I think if boards did, you would have early warning signals.
Let's not go into technicalities, but let's just ponder on that for a bit. You've mentioned the board of governance being a system of check and balance, and it should be a system of check and balance. But how micromanaging in that sense should they be, or should they just sit back and wait for the first sign to come up?
You see, there is a framework that I talk about in leadership called brains, bones, and nerves. The brains of a business is the vision and strategy. The bones of the business is the organizational architecture, right people in the right job, right systems, right structures, and the nerves is the culture. Now, the employees of any organization are a very good source of information on whether the management is doing a good job on maximizing value when it comes to brains, bones, and nerves. And one of the things that boards can do without micromanaging is ask to see a survey periodically from employees as to how do employees think we are doing against our vision and strategy. Do they recognize the strategy? Do we even have one? Do they feel like our organization structure is correct and it has enough checks and balances? Do they feel like they have a strong culture, and can they articulate that culture? If employees do not agree with those statements, those are your early warning signals, and then the board can engage in a dialogue with senior management as to, how can we help? What's going on? So I think there is no need for the board to micromanage, but there must be mechanisms like that with which boards can get information.
Before we go to the commercial break, let's talk about the thing that you mentioned just now, which is brain, bones, and nerves, and how can we apply that, or is that being applied to where Malaysia is right now, moving forward to become a high-income nation?
Well, actually, I've been a little over a year in Malaysia, and I am very impressed because I actually see, for the first time perhaps, at a country level, a framework being applied in taking the country from one level to another. clearly, they have a strategy in place. There is the economic transformation plan. That's the brain. Okay, you've identified 16 sectors. You've identified, amongst other things, talent and leadership is one of the things that we need to work upon. In terms of the bones, clearly, what are we going to do to bridge the talent and knowledge gaps? What kind of systems, what kind of structures do we need to have in place? And so yes, I see this being applied to at the country level in Malaysia. It's very impressive. The only other country that I saw this happen is Singapore, where many years ago they realized that one of the biggest issues that Asia has perhaps is lack of discipline, and amongst the bones and nerves parts, they actually went after that. They created rules. Some people criticized them that this is too much of a lack of freedom, if you will, but they clearly knew what they were doing. I think Malaysia is doing it even better. Without actually going into strictures. They have a strategy in place and they have an execution framework in place, which is very impressive.
We're going to take a short break, and then when we come back, we'll talk about iCleaf's leading voices and also your book, Too Many Bosses.